If you have ever lain awake at 3 in the morning, running the same conversation through your head for the 14th time, rebuilding a decision you already made, stress testing a future that hasn't happened yet, finding problems inside problems in a loop that your rational mind knows is completely unproductive and that your brain absolutely refuses to stop anyway, then you already know from the inside what this video is about. And what I want to tell you before we go any further is that this pattern, this exhausting, relentless, magnificently detailed analysis of everything that could go wrong and everything that might mean something and everything that deserves to be considered from one more angle before any conclusion can be trusted. This is not a flaw in your thinking. It is a feature of it. And understanding precisely why the smartest people are almost always the most chronic overthinkers will not just explain the pattern, but give you the first genuine psychological tool for interrupting it without losing the cognitive depth that makes your mind valuable in the first place. The relationship between intelligence and overthinking is not accidental and it is not coincidental. It is causal, and the causal mechanism runs directly through the specific cognitive architecture that high intelligence produces in the human brain. Intelligent people have what psychologists call a high need for cognition, a dispositional tendency to engage in and enjoy effortful analytical thinking, to find complexity interesting rather than threatening, to automatically generate multiple perspectives on any situation rather than settling for the first adequate interpretation, and to maintain a low tolerance for the kind of cognitive closure that most people find emotionally relieving, but that the intelligent mind experiences as premature, as a willful suppression of complexity that hasn't been fully resolved. This is the engine of overthinking, not weakness, not anxiety in its primary form, but the same cognitive machinery that makes deep thinking possible, running past the point of usefulness into the territory of diminishing returns, continuing to generate analysis after the analysis has stopped producing new useful information and has started producing only the neurological experience of thoroughness without the actual product of it. The neuroscience underneath this is specific and important. Research on the default mode network, the brain system responsible for self-referential thinking, future simulation, and the mental rehearsal of social scenarios, shows that it is significantly more active in people with higher measured intelligence, which means the intelligent brain is spending more time in the internally directed, scenario-generating, possibility-exploring cognitive mode that is the neurological substrate of both creative insight and chronic overthinking. And the difference between those two outcomes is not a difference in the brain doing the thinking, but in whether the thinking has a target, a boundary, and a termination condition that allows the prefrontal cortex to say, "Enough, we have what we need, we can decide now." And that termination condition is precisely what anxiety, perfectionism, and the specific fear of being wrong that intelligent people carry disproportionately tends to remove, leaving the analysis engine running without a destination in a loop that feels productive because it is effortful but is producing nothing because effort without resolution is just motion. There is another psychological layer here that is rarely discussed, and that is the relationship between overthinking and the specific fear that is most characteristic of intelligent people, which is not the fear of failure in the generic sense, but the fear of being wrong in a way that reveals the limits of the intelligence they have come to rely on as a core component of their identity. When your sense of self is substantially organized around being the person who thinks clearly, who sees what others miss, who can be trusted to analyze situations accurately, then being wrong is not just an inconvenience or a setback, it is an identity threat. And the brain responds to identity threats with the same defensive mobilization it brings to physical threats, which in this context takes the form of more analysis, more scenario generation, more consideration of alternatives, more stress testing of conclusions. Because if you keep thinking long enough, surely you will reach a conclusion so thoroughly examined that being wrong about it becomes neurologically impossible. Which is, of course, not how reality works, but is exactly how the overthinking loop sustains itself against every rational argument for stopping. And here is the solution. Not the complete elimination of deep thinking, which would be the destruction of your greatest cognitive asset, but the development of what psychologists call a decision threshold, a pre-committed standard for how much information and analysis is sufficient for a decision of a given magnitude, beyond which additional thinking is recognized not as due diligence, but as anxiety performing the costume of due diligence. And the moment that recognition occurs, the moment you can say, I am no longer thinking about this problem. I am using this problem to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty, is the moment the overthinking loses its disguise and becomes interruptible. Not through willpower, but through the simple, psychologically precise act of naming what it actually is, which is not intelligence doing its job, but fear borrowing intelligence's tools, and the powerful mind that can see that distinction clearly enough to act on it has not become less intelligent. It has become, for the first time, genuinely free to use its intelligence for what it was always capable of. Not endless analysis, but actual, courageous, imperfect, irreplaceable thought that leads somewhere real. Subscribe for more mind secrets.